I want to also think about China. I'm going to come back to China a little bit later because I think it's interesting. But sort of like the Axis powers in the previous world wars, the current relationship between the Iranians and the Russians, the North Koreans, Chinese, this four, as people like to sort of group them together, although I have my problems with it, that it only goes so far, General. And you know, it's a marriage of convenience. It's a strategic, convenient relationship. But the Russians don't give more than satellite imagery for the Iranians to help with potentially striking American targets. So do you not think that that's a fundamental limitation?
I guess the question is, could Russia sustain its war against Ukraine without China? I think the answer is no, because they wouldn't have the cash flow to do it, and they wouldn't have the electronics and the hardware to sustain their war-making machine. Could Iran could Iran continue without China? No. It would be financially completely isolated, and I mean, could Maduro have survived without China, Russia, and Iran? Heck no, right? I mean, this was a kleptocratic criminal regime. But I do take your point that we don't want to overestimate the strength of this axis. I think all of them are in positions of profound weakness at the moment because they perceived weakness in the Western world. They perceived weakness in Europe, in the United States, and that perception of weakness emboldened them. Remember, hey, just before the massive reinvasion of Ukraine, Putin and Xi Jinping meet prior to the Beijing Olympics, and they declare their partnership with no limits. Xi Jinping announces, hey, the new era of international relations. The subtext was, hey, we're in charge now, Western world, get used to it. You're finished. Then if you fast forward to April of 2023, Russia's already failed in Ukraine, but they still feel emboldened because the United States at that moment was unable to sustain support for Ukraine. We couldn't bring to a vote in the Congress continued weapons and munitions support. Also, there was a perception of weakness in Israel with the judicial reform efforts by Netanyahu. The Biden, the Biden relationship with Netanyahu was poor, and so Ayatollah Khamenei is looking at the situation and says, "Well, maybe now's the time to light the ring of fire, around Israel." And in April, as I mentioned, I mean, this is not October. In April, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin get together again, and this is when Xi Jinping says, Vladimir, we're seeing changes like we haven't seen in 100 years. And you and I, we're driving those changes. And Vladimir Putin looks up at Xi Jinping and says something like, damn straight, Xi Jinping, we are. And so they were, I mean, they thought they were in the driver's seat. They're the protagonists. But where are they now, right? The Russian economy's in a shambles. What is it? 1,200,000 dead and seriously wounded for the Russians. Maduro's in a New York prison. Where's Assad? He's playing video games in an apartment in Moscow. And and I think despite the narrative in the international media, Iran is not in a position of strength at this moment. They're in a position of profound weakness, and China has overextended its economy and it's overheated it in its race to surpass the United States and has real problems too. So I think, yeah, I mean, this axis I think has coalesced. I think we ought to glue them together, stop trying to separate them, because they all have these problems, and these problems we should hang around their necks, in my view, like lodestones at this moment.